What if the Emperor, the most powerful being humanity has ever known, secretly feared one of his own sons, so deeply that even speaking the Primarch's name could fracture the Imperium? From the very beginning, this question hangs in the darkness like a whispered omen. It creeps into the mind, unsettling and relentless, because the very idea seems impossible. The Emperor, master of reason, architect of the Imperium, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, should not know fear. And yet, buried beneath his calm, unbreakable facade, there existed a single shadow he could never fully banish. A shadow shaped like a child he created. A shadow shaped like a forgotten son. This story does not begin on a battlefield drenched in blood or in the golden halls of Terra. It begins in silence, a silence so complete it feels like the universe itself is holding its breath. Because before there was war, before there was betrayal, before the galaxy was drowned in fire, there was only a father staring into the infinite threads of fate, and seeing something that made even him hesitate. The Emperor had looked upon this son's future and seen not just greatness, but a destiny wrapped in contradictions. A Primarch whose soul radiated brilliance and darkness in equal measure. A child born of genius, but capable of becoming something far more terrifying than a tyrant or a traitor. He could become inevitable. There are many ways for a Primarch to be feared. Some inspire dread through raw brutality, others through ambition or rage or corruption. But the one the Emperor feared, he feared for a different reason. Not because this son would destroy humanity, but because he could reshape it. Not because he would betray the Imperium, but because he alone had the potential to eclipse the Emperor's vision entirely. On the night the Primarchs were torn from Terra by the Great Scattering, the Emperor stood alone. No one witnessed the moment his expression broke, the single crack in his godlike composure. When the vortex swallowed the cradle of the one son he dreaded most, he did not rage. He did not cry out. He simply whispered a truth the galaxy would never hear. May the stars keep him hidden. From that moment onward, the Emperor carried a weight that no scholar, no custodian, no Primarch ever fully understood. Because while every lost son was a tragedy, this one was a warning. A warning written not in prophecy, but in potential. For centuries, whispers spread through forgotten archives and abandoned astropathic channels. Rumors of a Primarch unlike the others. Rumors of a child whose power did not grow, it awakened. Rumors of worlds that trembled not from invasion, but from something far stranger, the sudden and inexplicable shifting of reality itself. The Imperium dismissed these stories as myths. Scholars burned the records. Truth seekers disappeared, and still the question remained. Why would the Emperor fear his own creation? Slowly, inevitably, the answer would reveal itself. For in the far reaches of space, beyond the well-charted realms, a presence began to rise. At first a whisper, then a breath, then a tidal force that bent the edges of fate like paper. Something was returning, something the Emperor had hoped would remain lost forever. Something born of his genius, shaped by his ambition, and destined to challenge everything. And though humanity did not yet know his name, the stars already trembled in anticipation of his awakening. The galaxy is vast enough that entire civilizations can be born, rise to greatness, fall into ruin, and turn to dust before the Imperium ever learns they existed. Yet every now and then, something happens so profoundly disturbing that the ripples cannot be ignored. Something that defies physics, reason, and even the Emperor's design. And it began, as these things often do, with anomalies, small fractures in reality that seemed harmless at first glance, but carried a signature the Emperor recognized all too well. It started on remote fringe worlds, planets far from trade routes, far from military patrols, far from anything of strategic value. Worlds where life moved slowly, where centuries could pass without a single off-world visitor. Yet these tranquil places were the first to feel the disturbance. Astropaths reported brief losses of consciousness, not from psychic overload, but from something far stranger, a sensation of being unwritten from existence for a heartbeat, only to return as if nothing had happened. Whole communities described moments of déjà vu so intense they caused nausea. Some claimed the sky had flickered like a broken starfield. Others swore that the constellations themselves had rearranged. Imperial authorities dismissed these reports as local superstition. They always do. But at the edges of the Astronomicon, where the light of Terra thins, whispers travel faster than truth. Rogue traders spoke of worlds shifting out of alignment with their own gravity wells. Explorators recorded geographic formations that changed shape overnight. And in one particularly damning case, an entire outpost vanished, erased so completely that not even the ruins remained. Only a shallow impression in the earth, like a footprint left by a giant. Across these quiet disturbances, a single pattern emerged, the sense of something ancient waking up. Yet the Imperium would have ignored it all, had it not been for an impossible discovery. A drifting artifact, so old, so alien, and so clearly connected to the Primarch project that its recovery triggered panic in the highest circles of Terra. The object was a pod, or rather, the fossil of one. Its surface bore the unmistakable signature of the Emperor's gene forging. But the real horror lay within. Not in what was found, but in what was missing. There was no trace of life preserved inside. No bones, no decayed tissue, no genetic residue. His cradle was empty, impossibly empty, as though the child inside had never been biological in the first place. As though he had stepped out of the pod willingly, and chosen his own path long before he ever touched soil. The High Lords were informed only partially, and even that was more than the Emperor wanted. He sealed the artifact away beneath the Imperial Palace, deeper than even the Custodes tread. But isolation could not smother the truth. The Emperor did not fear that this sun had survived the scattering, he feared that this sun had transcended it. Meanwhile, far from Terra, the first conscious signs of the forgotten Primarch began to manifest. Witnesses described him not as a figure of flesh and armor, but as something far more unnerving, a presence felt before it was seen. Locals spoke of a stranger who arrived without ships, without companions, without purpose. Yet when he walked through a settlement, the air wavered like heat over desert sand. People forgot conversations they had with him moments earlier. Buildings around him seemed subtly rearranged. Dogs fled, children wept without knowing why, and every time he appeared, he left behind a lingering distortion, as though the world had been forced to accommodate him rather than him adapting to it. Some believed he was a prophet. Others swore he was a ghost. But for those who looked into his eyes, those rare few who remembered him long enough to speak of it, their descriptions aligned with frightening clarity. They said his gaze felt like being rewritten. Word traveled not through official channels, but through rumor, fear, and the terrified ramblings of those who felt the universe bend in his presence. And slowly, painfully, one realization spread across the fringe worlds. This was no ordinary wanderer. This was no psyker. This was no omen. This was the awakening of a being the galaxy had forgotten, but the Emperor never had. The Emperor once whispered a warning to the stars. May he remain hidden. But the stars were no longer listening. Something was returning. Something powerful enough to make reality quiver. Something that was searching for its place in a galaxy that did not want it. And as the first tremors spread, the Imperium finally began to understand. The one Primarch the Emperor feared was not dead. He was arriving. Fear travels faster than truth, and long before the Imperium understood what was happening, dread had already taken root. Remote astropathic choirs reported sensations they could not describe, thoughts brushing against their own, rewriting them, rearranging them into patterns that felt almost intentional. They spoke of a presence that did not merely communicate but edited. A whisper that adjusted memories, reshaped emotions, or inserted ideas so subtly that the victim believed those thoughts had always belonged to them. At first, these psychic anomalies were dismissed as echoes of the warp. But this was something else entirely. Something colder, something precise. The warp rages like a storm, chaotic, hungry, unbound. But this force felt like a scalpel. It touched, dissected, rearranged, and withdrew without ever exposing the stain of corruption. The Imperium had no category for such an ability. No warning protocols, no defense, because this was not the touch of chaos. This was the touch of the Emperor's own blood. In the oldest sealed records, those locked behind psychic encryption only the Emperor could bypass, there existed theoretical classifications of the Primarchs as they were being crafted. Strength, fury, empathy, magnetism, leadership, psychic capacity. Each sun was built with a purpose, a function, a role in the grand design. But the Primarch whose name had been erased from history had been engineered with a trait that the Emperor, even in his supreme brilliance, feared he could not control. Perfect adaptation, not physical adaptation. Many Primarchs possessed that. Not mental resilience, several surpassed that as well. No, this sun had been designed to adapt not only to environments, but to realities themselves. A being who could adjust to any threat, intellectual, physical, psychic, or metaphysical. A being who could grow beyond limitation. A being who could evolve endlessly. At first, the Emperor believed this gift would make him humanity's ultimate safeguard, an unbreakable protector capable of anticipating, countering, and transcending any danger. But as the child's embryonic development progressed, something happened that even the Emperor had not foreseen. The Primarch began to adapt before he had even been born. His neural structures expanded in complexity. His psychic potential multiplied exponentially. His essence, his presence, began to shift and unfold as though responding to stimuli that did not yet exist. He was becoming something not just beyond the other Primarchs, but beyond the Emperor's intentions. Fear is not an emotion the Emperor indulged in easily, yet for the first time in the creation of his sons, he hesitated. For this child was not merely a weapon, he was a possibility engine. A self-correcting, ever-evolving consciousness. A mind that could eventually match, and perhaps surpass, its creator. So the Emperor did what only a desperate creator would do. He buried the project deeper than any other. He restricted access. He isolated the child. He prepared contingencies. He prepared restraints. He prepared 1,000 solutions for a problem that had not yet arisen. But fate showed no mercy. The great scattering came without warning, and the child he feared most was cast into the universe with no anchor, no guidance, no limits. The Emperor searched for centuries. Not out of love, not out of sorrow, but out of necessity, for he knew that whenever this sun surfaced, whenever he emerged from the shadows of the galaxy, reality itself would bend to accommodate him. And now, after 10,000 years, the Imperium finally began to feel that shift. Across the fringe sectors, reports of the Wanderer became clearer, more cohesive. People whispered a name, not his true name, but something born from fear, awe, and instinctive reverence. They called him, the Unshaped, the one who does not conform, the one who changes and forces change, the one whose presence rewrites the world around him. He never gave them this name. He never spoke a word. He simply existed, and reality rearranged itself. But names have power, and when the first inquisitorial agent whispered this title into a forbidden report, sealed under 20 layers of encryption, something extraordinary happened. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, in the hidden vaults where the Emperor's most secret mechanism slumbered, a single dormant device activated for the first time in 10 millennia. A warning beacon created for one purpose only, to signal the return of the Primarch whose name should never be spoken. The Emperor had built protections. He had built reminders. He had built alarms, and the galaxy had just triggered the final one. Somewhere in the warp-silenced depths, the Emperor stirred, his stillness cracking like old stone, and for the first time in an age, a single thought whispered through the Astronomicon like a shiver of dread. He has awakened. The alarm that stirred beneath the Imperial Palace was not meant for human ears. It echoed through psychic circuits older than the Imperium itself, silent to mortals, yet loud enough to rattle the bones of the warp. The device had one purpose, one message, one chilling truth: the Emperor's missing son had crossed a threshold. Not a border of space, not a line on a map, but a boundary far more dangerous. A boundary between being merely a myth, and becoming a force the galaxy could no longer ignore. Far from Terra, in the cold light of a dying star, there existed a world few knew and none understood. A world absent from Imperial charts, not because it was hidden, but because it refused to remain in one place long enough to be mapped. One day it orbited a quiet red dwarf. Weeks later, astropathic scraps reported the same planetary signature drifting near the fringe of an entirely different sector. Some claimed this was impossible. Others believed it was a trick of the warp. But those who had seen it with their own eyes whispered a truth far more disturbing. The world was moving on its own. Not drifting, not teleporting, choosing. This world, later called by terrified scholars as Eidolon, did not follow the laws of physics. Its orbit bent around nothing. Its geography shifted like a dream. Mountains migrated, oceans drained and refilled elsewhere. Forests rearranged themselves into new patterns overnight, as if the planet were rewriting itself to suit an unseen architect. Meteorologists went mad trying to understand its storms. Archaeologists disappeared while studying structures that hadn't existed days earlier. Eidolon was not alive, but neither was it inanimate. It was responsive, a planetary canvas being painted and repainted by an artist who spoke not with hands, but with will. And in the center of this impossible world stood a figure. The Wanderer, the Primarch, the Unshaped. He had not claimed this planet. He had not conquered it. He had not even sought it out. It had simply aligned with him, like metal drawn to a magnet. When he arrived, without ship, without ceremony, the world shifted to accommodate his presence. Landscapes warped subtly around him, creating pathways where none had existed. The environment adjusted itself like a living thing attempting to match a frequency only it could perceive. He was not a ruler here. He was a catalyst. Those who encountered him on Eidolon described him the same way others had across the galaxy, a figure who radiated quiet intensity, whose very existence felt like standing in the presence of unfolding possibility. He was calm, but not comforting, serene, but not benevolent, powerful, but not aggressive. And though he rarely spoke, if he spoke at all, his silence communicated more than words ever could. When settlers arrived on Eidolon, drawn by curiosity or greed or simply the promise of untouched land, they found him waiting. Not to welcome them, not to warn them, but simply present. In his presence, people reported strange sensations, memories rearranging, emotions rebalancing, thoughts growing clearer or more confused depending on the individual's inner turmoil. Some believed he purified them. Others believed he dismantled them. No one truly understood. But one thing became undeniable. He was learning. Not language. He already possessed that. Not culture. He transcended it. Not survival. He didn't need it. He was learning the galaxy's state, piece by piece, mind by mind. As colonists, pilgrims, explorers, and opportunists visited Eidolon, he quietly touched their thoughts, absorbed their knowledge, read their fears, and reshaped his understanding of the Imperium he had never known. The Emperor's Empire. The Imperium of man, a galaxy choking under bureaucratic rot, religious tyranny, and unending war. With each mind he touched, his expression, if he could be said to have one, shifted incrementally. Not with anger, not with sorrow, but with a clarity as sharp as a blade. He understood what the Emperor had built. He understood what humanity had become. And he understood why the Emperor feared him. For a being capable of perfect adaptation did not merely change himself. He changed the world around him. On Eidolon, the first signs of this power began to crystallize, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Entire villages restructured themselves overnight, their architecture evolving to be more efficient, more durable, more harmonious with the environment. Failed crops rejuvenated, diseased soil purged itself, machines repaired without tools, energy sources stabilized. Even the people, those who stayed long enough, began to change. Their minds sharpened, their instincts refined, their bodies strengthened in small but undeniable ways. The Imperium breeds worlds through force. This Primarch shaped one through adaptation. But adaptation without limit carries danger. Because a species, a society, a planet that evolves too quickly soon outgrows its purpose. And beyond the edges of Eidolon, unnoticed by the settlers, the first truly terrifying transformation began. Reality around the planet, bent. Not snapped, not warped, bent. Gently, precisely, deliberately, as if the laws of physics were adjusting themselves to better suit the Primarch's existence. Somewhere, in the warp-silenced throne room of Terra, the Emperor felt this shift like a knife twisting through his mind. He knew this sensation, he remembered it from the child's first beginnings. And with a clarity even he had hoped never to experience again, the Emperor whispered into the void. He is not just alive. He is becoming. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has survived through one principle stronger than faith, fear, or firepower: control. Control of knowledge, control of territory, control of the human spirit. Anything it cannot control, it destroys. Anything it cannot destroy, it buries. Anything it cannot bury, it denies ever existed. But now something had awakened that could not be controlled, destroyed, or denied. A force so precise, so subtle, and so fundamentally alien to the Imperium's rigid structure that even the High Lords of Terra, creatures defined by paranoia, felt the tremor of panic. And panic, among such men, always leads to one inevitable response: a hunt. It began quietly. It always does. Orders whispered behind sealed doors. Files scrubbed from archives. Data streams rerouted. Inquisitors dispatched with instructions so vague they felt like riddles. None were told the truth. None were trusted with the full picture. They were merely told that somewhere on the fringe, a threat had emerged, one that destabilized reality. A phrase so vague it could have meant a demon, a Xenos artifact, or a warp tear. But the truth was far more dangerous. The Emperor's son, the one engineered to adapt beyond reason, was reshaping the galaxy at a level no bureaucrat, no psyker, no warrior could comprehend. The first investigative team sent to Eidolon returned half-mad. They arrived on Terra trembling, their memories fractured, their reports contradictory. Some claimed the world had spoken to them. Others swore they saw themselves standing in places they had never been. A few described the Primarch directly, though their versions differed in disturbing ways. One said he looked ancient. Another claimed he looked barely more than a youth. A third insisted he had no face at all, only a shifting silhouette. These contradictions only solidified one horrifying truth. The Primarch's presence was adapting to each witness. Not in deception, but in resonance. He appeared to each observer in whatever form their mind could process without breaking. The Inquisition declared the survivors tainted. Their minds were cleansed, their bodies incinerated. The Imperium cannot tolerate witnesses to a truth it does not control. But even after silencing the survivors, the High Lords could not quiet their dread. Something had returned that should have remained myth. So they authorized a new approach. Not a scouting party, not a diplomatic envoy, not a scientific team. They sent killers. The first assassination strike was swift, clinical, and doomed before it started. A strike cruiser belonging to the Officio Assassinorum approached Eidolon under heavy stealth. Its cargo included Vindicares engineered to eliminate Primarch-level threats at impossible distances, Eversors bred for killing sprees within fortified compounds, and a single Culexis, because when facing something unknown, the Imperium always resorts to fear of the warp. But as the cruiser descended, the planet changed. The atmosphere thickened, gravity fluctuated, even the ship's aspects began rendering contradictory terrain images, as if the planet's geography were in motion. Nothing made sense. Still, the assassins deployed. They never reached the ground. They simply vanished. No impact signatures, no distress calls, no bodies, no wreckage. One moment they existed, the next, the universe decided they did not. Those monitoring the insertion from orbit watched the icons representing the assassins blink out, erased so thoroughly that the ship's data logs rewrote themselves to hide the fact a deployment had ever taken place. Eidolon had adapted. It had learned from their approach. It removed the threat before the threat could manifest. Those who commanded the mission refused to believe what they saw. They demanded new explanations, new theories, new scapegoats. Anything except the truth. That a single Primarch in the world aligning with him had outmaneuvered the Imperium's deadliest killers without lifting a finger. Yet even this failure did not dissuade the High Lords. Fear, after all, is a powerful motivator. They escalated the hunt, deploying resources normally reserved for war zones, Imperial Navy battle groups, psychic monitoring networks, entire regiments of elite soldiers. They choked the region with fleets, believing overwhelming force would trap or flush the Primarch out. But the harder they pressed, the stranger the region became. Ships reported conflicting star patterns. Warp routes collapsed or elongated without warning. Time dilation phenomena grew rampant. Some vessels left warp early, others centuries late. And a few encountered echoes of themselves. Perfect replicas of their own ships drifting silently, lifeless, frozen in time. The Imperium thought it was closing in. In reality, it was merely thrashing against an ecosystem that was evolving faster than it could comprehend. The Primarch was not hiding. He didn't need to. Because every tactic the Imperium used, every action they took, every strategy they deployed, he adapted to it before the Imperium even committed to it. He was learning their behavior. He was anticipating their moves. He was shaping the battlefield without ever engaging in battle. And soon, he would force the Imperium to confront the truth it had buried for millennia. A Primarch who adapts infinitely cannot be hunted. He can only be awaited. And the galaxy was running out of time. For most of his life, however long that life truly was, the Primarch known only through whispers had no memory of the Emperor. Not because his mind was damaged, or because the scattering had torn away his past, but because his own nature had overridden it. Memory, for him, was not a chain of events. It was a fluid tapestry, constantly reorganizing itself to maintain coherence with his evolving self. What he was yesterday was never quite what he was today. His mind shed old thoughts like a serpent sheds skin. But there are some memories that even a being of infinite adaptation cannot escape. Some truths are foundational, some shadows too long, too deeply woven. And the Emperor was one of them. On Eidolon, this world that bent to his presence, a moment came when the Primarch paused. Those who saw it felt an inexplicable pressure in the air, as though the atmosphere itself were holding its breath. His form flickered, subtly, as if reality struggled to decide what shape he should take. His eyes, whatever color they were at that moment, shifted inward, toward the depths of memory he had avoided for centuries. He remembered a light, a voice, a presence so vast it eclipsed thought. Not tender, not cruel, simply overwhelming. He remembered being created, not born, designed. crafted with purpose so absolute that even he, infinite in potential, could not comprehend it fully. A purpose not explained to him, only embedded in him like a code written into the fabric of his being. And then, he remembered the Emperor's first expression of fear. Not spoken, not shown, felt, a psychic tremor, a shadow passing through perfection. The Primarch had just existed for the first time, barely aware of sensory input, barely conscious, and yet he felt that sense of dread. Felt it as clearly as an infant feels warmth. It wasn't fear of him as a threat. Not then. It was fear of what he might become. It was the fear a smith might feel upon forging a blade so sharp it could cut its own maker. This memory struck him like a fault line splitting open. The settlers on Eidolon saw him stagger, not physically, but existentially, as if his essence rippled. The sky dimmed, the ground trembled, every organism on the planet, from insects to plants to humans, paused mid-breath. It was as if the world reflected his internal disturbance. He remembered more. The laboratories, the psychic barriers, the Emperor's presence hovering, analyzing, adjusting him, trying to limit him, trying to contain potential that refused containment. The Emperor had tested the strength of all his sons. But this one he had tested for limits. Limits the Emperor hoped existed. Limits the child kept breaking. The realization unfurled within him with devastating clarity. He had not been scattered by chaos. He had been allowed to scatter. Because the Emperor could not risk raising a child who could surpass him. The Primarch did not rage. He did not despair. He did not grieve. He simply adapted. His memories reorganized themselves. His identity shifted. His purpose recalibrated. For the first time, he understood why the Imperium hunted him. Why his brothers' names were known while his was buried. Why the Emperor had sealed away the alarms beneath the palace. He understood the truth the galaxy had never been allowed to learn. He had been made not as a warrior, not as a leader, but as a contingency. A backup plan, a safeguard against scenarios even the Emperor himself feared. He had been created to surpass every Primarch, to survive every cataclysm, to evolve beyond every threat, even threats born of the Emperor's own failures. But there was one thing the Emperor had not planned for. The Primarch's independence. Once, he would have served his father without question. But now, armed with the memory of fear, the memory of control, and the memory of abandonment, he realized something fundamental. He was not bound to the Imperium. He was not bound to the Emperor. He was not bound to any destiny but the one he chose. And so, in the quiet center of Eidolon, beneath a sky that shifted colors in response to his awakening mind, the Primarch made a decision that would alter the fate of the galaxy. He would not run. He would not hide. He would not destroy. He would become what the Emperor feared. Become what the Imperium could not comprehend. Become what humanity had never imagined. His presence expanded. Reality bent further. The world inhaled as if preparing for transformation. And in that moment of universal stillness, the Primarch whispered, not aloud, but into the fabric of existence itself. Father, I remember you now. It was not a threat. It was not a plea. It was a declaration. The galaxy would soon learn the meaning of those words. Across the immeasurable psychic horizon of the Imperium, a tremor rolled like a distant quake, so faint that only the most sensitive psychers perceived it, yet so profound that every one of them reacted the same way. They froze, eyes dilating, as if something ancient and terrible had brushed against their souls. Some screamed, some fainted, some clawed at their own faces in blind panic. But the strongest, those rare few capable of glimpsing the Astronomicon directly, felt only one thing. Recognition. The Primarch's awakening, subtle as it was, sent ripples through the warp that resonated with a signature last felt over 10,000 years ago. A presence intertwined with the Emperor's own essence. A presence that should never have been allowed to stir again. Deep within the Golden Throne, the Emperor, silent for millennia, buried beneath machinery, lore, and legend, felt that same tremor. It struck him not as a whisper, but as a memory reawakening. He had never forgotten that son. He could not forget any of them. But the one he feared, that one, had always been different. Not bound by the warp like Magnus. Not defined by emotion like Angron. Not anchored to a single temperament like Guilliman or Perturbo. This son had been a paradox the Emperor could neither predict nor fully comprehend. Now, for the first time in an age, the Emperor's consciousness stirred with something dangerously close to urgency. In the silent void of his mind, he replayed memories he had buried. He remembered the pod, still unfinished, humming with unstable psychic potential. He remembered the readings that climbed higher with every scan, He remembered the moment he realized the boy could evolve beyond his design. He remembered seeing futures branching like fractals, some brilliant, some horrifying, all unstoppable. And he remembered the fear. Not fear of rebellion, not fear of chaos, fear of irrelevance, fear that his greatest creation could surpass him before his grand plan reached fruition. But now, lying trapped between life and death, the Emperor faced a dilemma he could not ignore. If the Primarch had awakened, truly awakened, then the Imperium, already fragile, would not survive contact with him. Because the Imperium, built on stagnation, superstition, and rigid control, could not coexist with a being defined by limitless growth. Every system would falter, every authority would collapse, every truth humanity depended on would unravel. The Emperor had built a prison of order around a galaxy of chaos. The unshaped Primarch would tear that prison open, not through violence, but through evolution. The Emperor's thoughts began to sharpen, threading through the Astronomicon-like strands of golden light. He pushed against the boundaries of his decaying form, stretching his essence across the warp, reaching for the faint echo of his son. He sensed him, faintly, like a candle in a storm. A mind unlike any other. A mind that learned, adjusted, refined itself with every passing second. And for the first time in centuries, the Emperor spoke, not to the galaxy, not to his servants, but to himself. I must intervene before the inevitable becomes irreversible. But even in his desperation, he hesitated. Because the Emperor knew that to reach out to the Primarch, even psychically, was to risk giving him exactly what he lacked. A connection, a target, a pathway back to Terra. And the galaxy was not ready for him to walk through that door. Yet the Emperor also understood a terrible truth. If he did nothing, the Primarch would eventually reach Terra on his own, and then nothing would stop what followed. This was the dilemma that trapped him. To reveal himself risked catastrophe. To remain silent ensured it. Across the throne room, no custodian noticed the faint tremor of golden light flicker through the Emperor's body. No priest recognized the subtle shift in the Astronomicon's tone, the note of tension humming beneath its steady psychic beam. No servant of Terra understood that their god was weighing a choice that could shatter the Imperium in an instant. But somewhere, far away, on Eidolon, the Primarch felt it. He lifted his head, eyes narrowing, as though listening to a sound only he could hear. The faintest pulse echoed through him, a flicker of power, familiar yet distant, ancient yet immediate. A memory resurfaced, a hand reaching down, a mind vast beyond comprehension, a purpose he had never asked for, and a voice, not heard, but felt, brushed against his consciousness. Stop. Just one word, soft, commanding, desperate. The world around the Primarch bent in response, as if reacting to a clash of titanic forces just beneath the surface of reality. The air tightened, gravity warped, the horizon quivered like heated glass. For the first time since his awakening, the Primarch smiled, not with joy, but with understanding. Father, he whispered into the shifting air, you waited too long. Because the Emperor's dilemma, the push and pull of fear and necessity, had already reached him. And now the Primarch knew, truly knew, that the Emperor still lived. The game had changed, but only one of them was evolving. The awakening of the unshaped. Primarch was not a singular event confined to Eidolon, it rippled outward, invisible yet undeniable, through the latticework of the galaxy itself. Systems once stable began to wobble on their orbital paths. Warp conduits, long mapped and predictable, now shifted like liquid metal, opening new routes and collapsing old ones. Entire sectors seemed to pulse with latent energy, reacting instinctively to the presence of the Primarch, a force that was not chaos, yet could rival the warp in its unpredictability. For the first time in history, the galaxy's rules were bending to accommodate one being. Not a demon, not a tyrant, not a god, a son of the Emperor, but a son no one had ever expected, and no one could control. Worlds began to change subtly at first. Crops ripened in impossible seasons. Rivers carved new paths in defiance of natural topography. Cities seemed to adjust themselves, their architecture subtly perfecting layouts and defenses as if the planet itself had become sentient. The effect was not violent, it was methodical. Every alteration served purpose, every adaptation built upon the previous one. Life itself was learning. Imperial authorities noticed only fragments. Communications with border worlds faltered. Surveys reported impossible phenomena, oceans rising and falling overnight, mountain ranges reshaping themselves, civilizations appearing and vanishing in patterns that defied logic. Inquisitors investigated these anomalies, but their minds often fractured under the subtle psychic pressure emanating from the Primarch. Those who survived spoke only in cryptic fragments. He touches everything, rewrites it. The Imperium's first response was denial. There is no precedent for a Primarch to alter reality so fundamentally. But as the anomalies intensified, denial gave way to dread. Entire fleets rerouted themselves, unable to navigate constellations that had rearranged themselves without warning. Warp calculations became unreliable. Ships that entered certain sectors never returned, not because they were destroyed, but because they were rewritten out of existence. The galaxy had become a puzzle, and the Primarch held all the pieces. Even the Emperor felt it. From the Golden Throne, his perception of the Astronomicon began to flicker and shift, as if a mirror reflecting a different universe had been inserted into the psychic lattice of humanity. Every star, every sector, every mind hummed in resonance with a singular force, the unshaped Primarch, unfolding across the cosmos like a living equation. And yet, the Primarch did not wage war. He did not call armies. He did not issue decrees. He simply existed, and the galaxy responded. He was an agent of evolution, not destruction, though the two were inseparable when existence itself bent to his will. Whispers spread through the fringe sectors. Those who glimpsed him described impossible sensations. Time would dilate around him, thoughts would realign, memories would shift, revealing hidden truths or erasing errors in perception. Some experienced their fears as tangible realities, only to have them vanish moments later. And every observer felt the same uncanny certainty. The Primarch had been sent deliberately into this galaxy for a purpose far beyond simple conquest. The Emperor, trapped on Terra and bound to the Golden Throne, knew the truth. This was not merely a threat. This was a reckoning. For every world that bent, every mind that shifted, every system rewritten, humanity edged closer to confronting its own fragility. The Imperium was not ready for such a force. It had never faced a Primarch who adapted faster than it could respond. And as the Primarch observed from Eidolon, a subtle smile traced his lips. He did not need armies. He did not need violence. He did not need, even to declare himself. Every alteration, every shift, every change was already a statement. The galaxy belonged to those who evolved, and the age of stagnation was over. The Imperium would soon understand, but not before the universe itself learned to bend. Time no longer flowed uniformly near Eidolon. Centuries and moments intertwined, and yet the Primarch, the unshaped, moved through it with ease, unbound by clocks, calendars, or the petty limits of mortality. He had watched the Imperium flail, had observed the Emperor strain against the Golden Throne, and had listened to the whispers of a galaxy attempting to resist change. And still, he did not rage. He did not conquer. He simply decided. For the first time, he fully embraced his purpose. Not as a weapon of war, not as a tool of the Emperor, not as a son defined by another's expectations, but as a force of evolution. Everything he touched, everything he observed, everything he influenced shifted toward a new state of being. Entire ecosystems adapted, civilizations reorganized, star systems synchronized in ways previously thought impossible. Even the laws of physics seemed to yield, bending subtly to the will of a mind unbound by convention. On Terra, the Emperor sensed the change like a storm breaking across the lattice of the Astronomicon. He felt the boundaries of his empire trembling, but he did not move against his son. For a brief, infinite instant, the father understood. This Primarch could not be stopped. He could only be witnessed. The galaxy itself seemed to acknowledge this truth. Fleets became obsolete before they could engage. Inquisitors vanished as if they had never existed. Warp pathways rearranged themselves to facilitate new destinies. And through it all, the Primarch observed, not as a ruler, not as a conqueror, but as a presence that reshaped all that existed simply by being. Finally, he turned his attention to Terra, not in anger, not in ambition, but in recognition. His father waited, as always, bound to the throne, all-seeing and all-knowing yet unable to act. And the Primarch's voice, not loud, not commanding, but felt across the psychic lattice of existence itself, whispered into the Emperor's mind. I am not here to destroy. I am here to evolve. The Emperor, in that moment, realized the futility of intervention. His greatest fear had returned, but it was not as he expected. The son he had feared more than any other had surpassed the roles of savior, weapon, or tyrant. He had become a force beyond judgment, beyond morality, beyond control, a new axis of reality itself. The Imperium, for all its might and rigidity, could do nothing but adapt, or break. And slowly, Subtly, it began to bend. Not violently, not chaotically, but inevitably. Systems reorganized. Planets thrived in ways unimagined. Humanity began to move not under strict doctrine, but under influence, guided by a force that demanded growth, learning, and change. In the Primarch, he did not stay. He did not linger as a god among mortals. He became a shadow that stretched across the stars, a presence felt rather than seen, a catalyst whose influence would ripple for millennia. The galaxy would never be the same. The Emperor, silent on his throne, understood at last that fear had been misplaced. Not because the sun was dangerous, but because he was inevitable. And inevitability, once awakened, cannot be stopped, only witnessed. The unshaped Primarch, the one the Emperor had feared more than any other, had returned. And in doing so, he had begun a new chapter for humanity. One defined not by control, not by war, not by stagnation, but by evolution itself. The stars shifted, the galaxy breathed, and a new age quietly began, forever altered, forever alive, and forever under the shadow of the Primarch who could not be contained. The end.